A love against all odds. The tale of Eros and Psyche in the tapestry of Greek mythology, among tales of warring gods and epic heroes, lies a story of love so unusual it reads more like a fairy tale. It is the romance between a mortal woman and the god of love himself, a story that journeys from blind devotion to bitter betrayal and ultimately to an unbreakable union. This is the story of Eros and Psyche, a testament to the idea that true love must overcome the greatest of trials. Our story begins in a certain kingdom where a king had 3 daughters. The 2 elder princesses were beautiful, but the beauty of the youngest, whose name was Psyche, was so extraordinary that it defied description. Her fame spread across the lands, and people began to travel from far and wide just to gaze upon her and offer her adoration, treating her as if she were a goddess. This worship of a mere mortal drew the attention and intense jealousy of a powerful deity, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. She was outraged that mortals would dare to neglect her own altars and temples to instead sing praises to a girl. Aphrodite's pride was wounded, and her anger grew into a desire for cruel and swift revenge. Determined to punish the young woman who had stolen her glory, Aphrodite summoned her son, Eros, the mischievous and powerful god of love, known to the Romans as Cupid. She commanded him to use his golden arrows, which could make anyone fall in love, to strike Psyche and cause her to fall desperately in love with the most hideous and contemptible creature he could find. While Eros set off to do his mother's bidding, Psyche's parents grew worried. Despite her unparalleled beauty, no suitor came to ask for her hand in marriage. Men would admire her, but they would not court her. In desperation, her father traveled to the oracle of Apollo to seek guidance about his daughter's future. The prophecy he received was terrifying. The oracle declared that Psyche was not destined for any mortal husband. Her fated groom was a terrible monster, a creature of wings and venom whom even the gods themselves feared. The prophecy instructed that Psyche must be dressed in funeral attire, taken to the peak of a lonely mountain, and left there to be claimed by her monstrous husband. The kingdom was plunged into sorrow, but the word of an oracle could not be disobeyed. With heavy hearts, Psyche's parents prepared their daughter for her grim fate. A mournful procession, more like a funeral than a wedding, accompanied the brave young woman to the desolate mountaintop, where they left her alone to face her destiny. As Psyche stood weeping on the rocky precipice, a gentle force lifted her from the ground. It was Zephyrus, the god of the west wind, who had been sent to her aid. He softly carried her down from the barren peak and into a lush, green valley, laying her down in a meadow of fragrant flowers where she soon fell into a peaceful sleep. When Psyche awoke, she found herself before a magnificent palace, a structure so grand and opulent it seemed to have been built by the gods themselves. With a mixture of fear and wonder, she cautiously entered. The halls were filled with treasures, but there were no people to be seen. Instead, disembodied voices spoke to her, welcoming her and telling her that the palace and all its riches were now hers. That night, as she lay in the darkness of her new bedchamber, her promised husband came to her. She could not see him in the pitch-black room, but his voice was kind and his presence was gentle, not monstrous at all. He made her promise one thing, that she must never, under any circumstances, try to look upon his face. If she did, he would be forced to leave her forever. Psyche, though curious, agreed to his terms. Night after night, her unseen husband would visit her, and she grew to love him deeply for his kindness and the affection he showed her. For a time, she lived in a state of pure bliss, wanting for nothing in her enchanted palace and cherishing the moments she spent with the husband she loved but could not see. However, in her perfect isolation, Psyche began to feel a deep sense of loneliness and started to miss her family. She begged her mysterious husband to allow her 2 older sisters to visit her. After much pleading, He reluctantly agreed, but warned her that her sisters would bring her ruin and unhappiness. The west wind Zephyrus brought the two sisters to the magical palace. At first, they were overjoyed to see Psyche alive and well. But as she showed them the immense splendor of her home, their joy curdled into bitter jealousy. They could not stand to see their youngest sister living in such luxury while they were married to mortal kings. The jealous sisters began to plant poisonous seeds of doubt in Psyche's mind. They preyed on her husband's warning, convincing her that his secrecy was proof that he was, in fact, the horrifying monster from the oracle's prophecy. They told her he was only being kind to fatten her up before he eventually devoured her. They devised a wicked plan for her. They told Psyche that she must hide a sharp knife and an oil lamp near her bed. That night, she was to wait until her husband was deep in sleep, light the lamp to finally see his true form, and if he was the monster they described, she must bravely plunge the knife into his heart. Torn between the love she felt for her husband and the terrifying fear her sisters had instilled in her, Psyche's resolve crumbled. That night, with trembling hands, she prepared the lamp and the knife. She waited until he was sound asleep, and then, steeling her nerves, she lit the lamp and held it over the bed. But what she saw was not a monster. Lying peacefully asleep on the bed was the most beautiful being she had ever laid eyes on, the god Eros himself, with his golden curls and magnificent feathered wings. In her shock and relief, her hand trembled, and a single drop of hot oil fell from the lamp onto the god's shoulder. Startled awake by the searing pain, Eros opened his eyes and saw the lamp, the knife, and the broken promise in Psyche's hands. He looked at her not with anger, but with profound sorrow and a sense of betrayal. He now knew that she did not trust him. Before she could beg for forgiveness, he rose into the air. "Love cannot live where there is no trust," he said, his voice filled with pain. With those final words he flew away, and as he departed, the magical palace and all its beautiful gardens vanished, leaving Psyche alone and weeping on the cold, hard ground. Utterly heartbroken and filled with remorse, Psyche was determined to find her lost love and earn back his forgiveness. She began to wander the earth, searching for any sign of Eros. Her journey eventually led her to a desperate decision. She would go to the temple of Aphrodite, the mother of Eros and the source of her misfortune, and offer herself as a servant. Aphrodite, however, was still furious. She was enraged that Psyche had defied her, had secretly been with her son, and had caused Eros to be so lovesick and heartbroken that he now refused to leave his chambers. Seeing Psyche before her, the goddess decided she would not grant mercy, but would instead torment the mortal girl with a series of seemingly impossible tasks. For the first task, Aphrodite led Psyche to a storehouse and showed her a massive, chaotic pile of mixed grains, wheat, barley, poppy seeds, and more. She ordered Psyche to sort the entire heap into separate piles by nightfall, or she would face a terrible punishment. Overwhelmed, Psyche sat and wept, but a colony of ants, taking pity on her, came to her aid, and working together, they sorted every last seed. Unimpressed by her success, Aphrodite devised a second, more dangerous task. She commanded Psyche to cross a river and collect the golden wool from a flock of ferocious sheep that grazed on the other side. These sheep were known to be incredibly violent and would attack any human who approached them. As Psyche neared the river, ready to give up, she heard a voice from the reeds along the bank. The reed whispered advice, telling her not to approach the sheep directly. Instead, she should wait until the sun began to set and the flock had moved on. Then, she could safely collect the strands of golden wool that had been snagged on the thorny bushes where the sheep had rested. For the third task, Aphrodite demanded a flask of water from the river Styx, the river that flows through the underworld. The source of the river was a waterfall cascading down a sheer, unclimbable cliff, guarded by fearsome dragons. Seeing the impossibility of the task, an eagle, the messenger bird of Zeus, swooped down, took the flask from her, and flew up to the treacherous waterfall, returning it to her filled with the dark water. Furious that Psyche had succeeded yet again, Aphrodite conceived a final, ultimate challenge. She gave Psyche a small, empty box and ordered her to journey into the underworld itself. She was to go to Persephone, the queen of the underworld, and ask her to fill the box with a dose of her divine beauty, as Aphrodite claimed she had grown weary from tending to her lovesick son. To aid her in this perilous journey, a voice from a high tower gave her careful instructions. It told her how to enter the land of the dead, how to carry 2 coins in her mouth to pay the ferryman Charon for a round trip, and how to carry honey cakes to appease Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog of Hades. Psyche followed the instructions precisely and safely navigated the treacherous realm of the dead. She presented herself before Queen Persephone, who, taking pity on the mortal girl, agreed to Aphrodite's request. She gave Psyche the box but gave her one final, stern warning. She must not, under any circumstances, open it. Having completed her final task, Psyche began her journey back to the mortal world. But as she neared the light, a fatal curiosity, combined with a desperate desire to look beautiful for Eros when she saw him again, overwhelmed her. She thought that if she took just a tiny bit of the divine beauty for herself, Eros would surely fall in love with her all over again. She carefully lifted the lid, but the box did not contain beauty. Instead, a deep, death-like slumber, a Stygian sleep, rose from the container and enveloped her. She fell to the ground, unconscious, appearing as if she were dead. Meanwhile, Eros, having finally recovered from his burn and his heartache, could no longer bear to be without Psyche. He escaped from his chamber and flew in search of her, finding her lifeless form on the ground. He gently wiped the sleep from her body and carefully placed it back into the box. He then woke her with a harmless prick of one of his arrows. Knowing that they could never be happy under his mother's wrath, Eros flew directly to Mount Olympus to plead their case before Zeus, the king of the gods. Moved by the depth of their love and the trials they had endured, Zeus agreed to intervene. He summoned all the gods, including a reluctant Aphrodite, and officially declared his divine will. Zeus then turned to Psyche and presented her with a cup of ambrosia, the nectar of the gods. He told her to drink it and become immortal, so that she could be eternally united with her husband. Psyche drank, and at that moment she was transformed into a goddess. With Aphrodite's objections finally silenced by a divine decree, Eros and Psyche were officially and joyfully married on Mount Olympus, their unusual and difficult romance finally reaching a happy and eternal conclusion.